Hey everyone, hope you've had a great holiday and Happy New Year. Today I wanted to dive into some of my reflections and thoughts on getting into Baldwin. I know I talked about getting into more of his works in 2 videos ago. I got so much supportive comments and encouragement from folks encouraging me to get started with his works. And yeah, almost everyone said that I should start with Giovanni's Room, and unfortunately I didn't do that. I did the opposite. I started with Notes of a Native Son, as I mentioned in that video. But yeah, unfortunately I'm just like a sucker for any sort of like big picture social criticism essay type pieces, and just wanted to sort of get to the meat and potatoes of his intellectual ideas and the themes in his writing. But I know that Baldwin himself already, I'm like able to tell from just a few of the essays in Notes of a Native Son, that he's someone who holds like the artistic expression and literary merit and writing in very high regard. And so I think ultimately like it would be a disservice to not also embark on some of his novels and see what sort of themes and ideas like come out of those works. And so I will get to them. I will get to them. But I just decided to start with this collection of essays just to sort of like get to the heart of things as soon as possible. So for this video, I just want to talk about a few themes that I think have been coming up recurring and that really stood out to me in Notes of Native Son. And just talk a little bit about what they mean, how I'm interpreting them, and then for some of them, maybe how they relate to my personal life as well. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. So just for a little bit of context, Notes of Native Son is a collection of essays that were published in 1953. And overall through these essays, Baldwin is grappling with the African American experience and how it's being portrayed and written in literature and in different novels. But he's also grappling with African American experience and race at large within society, and offering his own like insights, commentary, and criticisms. And then also talking really strongly about identity and his own identity, but also the identity and the representations of different African American identities in literature and in mainstream media. So I just wanted to get started with a few themes that he kind of brings up. The first one, as I'm reading Notes of a Native Son, that like really comes up like really fundamentally early on, is his critique and this commentary on categorization and on like the ways in which it can be harmful and the ways in which it like simplifies a lot of like the human experience. And so the way he talks about this is he's critiquing Uncle Tom's Cabin, the novel that I guess came out right before the Civil War, and then also Native Son, who title this collection of essays is actually taken from. And he's critiquing the depiction of the African American experience in those books. He finds that they rely too much on stereotypes, and they actually like propagate harmful stereotypes about African American experiences, but also really fail to capture the overall like African American experience in a way that is helpful, in a way that is valuable, and in a way that explains like the nuance of what it actually means to be African American. And so overall he's making this attack and this critique of like reducing people to categories and reducing this like large like the Black identity or the Black experience to a very narrow and superficial characters. And so in reading this, it's clear that Baldwin himself really fundamentally almost like rejects this idea of like a fixed Black experience. He rejects the idea of categories. He rejects the ways that putting people into these boxes, into these like neat little boxes, is like extremely harmful. And he specifically says that categories in themselves shut us off from the world, but they also shut us off from ourselves. And he has this quote where he says, categorization refers to the conditions and the circumstances in which one lives, but it doesn't actually capture the essence of the individual. It doesn't capture what actually makes that person a unique human, and it doesn't capture their own like unique human experience. I think like this to me, these ideas that he was talking about and writing about in the 1950s, I think are just so like pertinent and salient, and I think it's particularly interesting to read about because even in this time of the civil rights movement and the Black freedom movement, is that he's saying like, yes, it's important as African Americans and as like Black Americans and as minorities in this country that is built off of white supremacy and that is built off of the institution of slavery. It's important for us to come together, but as we're coming together, let's also remember that we're all different, that we share different experiences, that two black persons, even though they share this common experience of being black, are in their own two separate individuals with very different lived experiences, with ways in which they navigate the world. And so he's cautioning us. He's telling us that even though that as minorities it's important for us to come together and to hold one another in arms in solidarity and understand the experiences of one another, of our brothers and sisters, he cautions us and tells us that we ought to not take it too far, that we're then diminishing our own individuality. I think probably the reason why this sticks out to me so much is because it's something that I think I've struggled with a lot, even, like almost like 70 years after like Baldwin is writing this, is feeling like an outcast because I don't always like fall into like mainstream like black culture. I mean, not to say that mainstream black culture is this like fixed entity, because I think that's exactly what Baldwin doesn't want us to say. But in ways, I think even like within the black community, there are ways, there are like things that are more accepted and things that are probably like a little bit less accepted. And I think in a lot of ways, I kind of like tended more towards things that were a little bit less accepted, and then oftentimes felt like shunned or like an outcast within my own black identity. And so I'll give a few examples. So when I was growing up, I've always sort of navigated like predominantly like white institutions and predominantly like white environments. I grew up oftentimes being, of all like the black students in my school, oftentimes I was like the only one in like the advanced like math classes or the advanced English classes. And so I think that always gave me like this sense of like uneasiness that, oh, I'm like, why does it feel like I'm black on the outside and I'm being treated differently from, these other black students, but I don't feel like I'm always like in the same circle, or, I'm this kid who is like black on the outside, but like white on the inside. This, again, like using the language of the categories in order to box myself into these groups, and it's a really dangerous approach, because I think as a child, you grow up thinking about how do I actually fit more into the category of blackness? How do I fit more into the category of like of being a black male? This is actually interesting because it then also ties into the whole question of representation and the identities and the forms of blackness that are represented in the media, and how that like inspires children to then want to like strive towards those different ideals or those different types of characters, which is why a movie like Black Panther is like great, or a movie like Miles Morales and Spider-Man is great, because it teaches young black children that you can be nerdy, you can want to go to MIT, and that's great, that's amazing. But anyway, not to get off tangent, or not to get on a tangent. I think Baldwin's point is really important, because he's saying that categories not only limit our ability to see other people. So if I see like two black people down the street and I see them as both black males, if I'm using this approach of like categorizing people rather than seeing people as individuals, not only am I seeing them, I'm reducing them to these boxes, but then also for people who are growing up as minorities, for black students, for any sort of like underrepresented minority in the States, for people who are growing up with those labels or with those categories almost like prescribed to them or sort of like forced upon them, it's hampering and limiting their sense of individuality. It's preventing them from feeling proud and confident and strong in the things that make them different, and the things that maybe bring them away from the norms, or bring them away from the ways in which people like them are being represented in the media. And so I think what Baldwin is saying is that it's both harmful for the person who is looking at other people in this like narrow categories point of view, using things like race, or using things like this black guy or this black woman, but it's also harmful for the people who are receiving, because it's limiting and stifling their sense of individuality. It's limiting how this unique combination of their experiences actually comes together to make up someone who is an individual. And so I just thought that was such like a powerful and insightful like theme for him to be wrestling with, and especially at a point where I think there was like a huge sense of black solidarity during the civil rights movement, where it's like, okay, well, we need to stick together. The formation of like identity politics and kind of like politicking in groups, because if you don't come together, what hope do you have? What other means do you have towards creating a more free and more just world? Such insightful, honestly, like brilliant insights, and I think it's in some ways alarming, but also like really cool to see how you can take those lessons and apply them to today as well. The next thing that I want to talk about just a little bit is Baldwin's emphasis on looking at the present through the lens of history and looking at the present through the lens of the past. He has this one quote where he says, "The past is all that makes the present coherent." And I think that this is really important because what he's telling us is that not to focus on the past, not to focus on, all the terrible atrocities of the past, but to focus on how the past is then impacting the world that we navigate today. And this is actually like really incredible because in that last video that I posted 2 videos ago, I think I was literally exactly like saying that I wanted to like come to terms and like think about the movements that have made it such that I can navigate the world as I do today. And that's exactly what like Baldwin is saying. He's like encouraging us to to look at the present, the state of the world today, to look at our actions, to look at the ways in which we navigate the world through the lens of history, and like why these things are the way they are, by looking at the movements that came before us. So that was just it was like he answered my callings, or he answered my askings. But this is like such an important point that he's bringing up, because he's saying that we need to understand history, we need to understand the underlying principles of the country. We need to, and obviously he's writing about this within the context of the civil rights and Black freedom struggle. But what he's saying is that we need to be able to look at the past, wrestle with this terrible, atrocious monstrosity of a history that we have and that we carry as a nation. We need to look at it. We need to look at it face on. We need to admit and accept what it actually is in order for us to imagine the world differently, in order for us to imagine what the world might look like in a better and more just social environment. And so I think like this, like as we're navigating like today's political atmosphere, it's like, okay, well, police brutality in like 2017 and 2022 is very different from Jim Crow. Jim Crow is very different from like the institution of slavery. But if you look at all these things and their connections, if you look at the underlying histories that are tying all these things together, well, you get fundamentally that the underlying root, the underlying thing that carries through all these things is, the fact that like some people in a country are valued more than others. The fact that like white supremacy was at the heart of America's founding. The fact that that legacy still carries on today, that white supremacy and that racism still carry on today. And so what he's saying is that, the current times, the present might look different from the past, but we still need to understand the past in order to understand, what are the themes, what's the throughput that still continues on today. And I think like in a way he's like challenging us. He's saying that as you navigate the world, as you see things that don't look right, don't turn a blind eye. When you're walking down the street in New York and you see of the 100 homeless people that you see going around Manhattan, 90% of them are Black. Like, don't turn a blind eye to that. Think about it. Understand, okay, well, why is that? Why have these things become the way they are? What has led these things to be as they are in the present day? Like, how does this actually start if we go back far enough? I think this really ties into maybe just like the last thing that I'll say in this video, is that clearly from just like reading a few of Baldwin's works, is that he's clearly a moralist. He's someone with a strong principled foundation, and someone who has a deep commitment towards honesty, towards the truth, and towards trying to be, almost like a conduit of the truth, of someone who is translating the truth for the masses. And when he's saying that we need to look through the lens of history, he's saying that we need to look at the present through the lens of history. To me, I'm taking that as like, okay, well, we need to be able to accept that history. We need to be able to accept the terror and the monstrosities of our past in order for us to then be able to imagine something differently. If you're an alcoholic, if you're someone who's really struggling with an addiction, the first step is to accept and to admit it before you can even imagine a life where you're no longer burdened by that alcoholism, or before you're no longer burdened by that addiction. You have to come to terms and accept those things for what they are, so that you can imagine a life in a world where it's very different. And I think at the heart of Baldwin's message is this sort of like moral standpoint of saying, actually, like, we need to be true to ourselves, because if we aren't true to ourselves, then we're only hurting ourselves. And we're not only hurting people who have been traditionally oppressed in this country, but we're also hurting the oppressors, the people who have been in positions of power, because by not accepting the truth, by not accepting the full extent of the past, by not coming to terms and wrestling with that difficult and uncomfortable history, it's like we're distorting ourselves as moral characters because we're preventing ourselves from looking at the truth. We're preventing ourselves from looking at things that have happened, to the ways in which our country has committed grave injustices towards different people, and towards particularly towards like black people and other minorities in this country. And so Baldwin is encouraging us. He's saying that not only do we need to look at the present in order to understand. Not only do we need to look at the past in order to understand the present, but we also need to do that for our own character, to become people who are morally sound and can actually like create a world and a society where democracy is able to thrive, where the principles that we uphold, freedom, equality, liberty, democracy, are actually things that we can say with truth and confidence, rather than rather than being things. Rather than things that we say and spout but don't actually live by. To get to that point where we're living in a country where we are, to get to that point where we live in a country, to get to that point of being this country that is actually like upheld by our ideals, that in order to do that, truth, honesty, and accepting our history is at a core part of that. It's a core part of the people that we need to become, the people that we need to the people that we need to be in order for that sort of system to work. And yeah, it's incredible that I've only read a few of his essays, and also watched a few interviews and read a few other passages about him as a person and as an individual. But it's incredible to see how his ideas persist, and how like the ways in which he his insights are truly just so persisting, so like timeless. And yeah, I'm just excited to continue on this journey. I'm excited for the reflections and the thoughts and the themes that come up. And yeah, I think I'll make another video as I continue through some more of his essays and more of his nonfiction works, and then we'll get to his fictional works as well. So if you enjoyed this video, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to check out another one on the channel, and please leave some comments what you thought about my reflections, what you've thought about Notes of a Native Son, or anything about Baldwin. Would love to keep the conversation going in the comment section. Okay, thank you so much, and enjoy the first week in 2024.